Hi, I'm Julie Ulrich. I'm American, but I live in France, and I'm here today to talk about horses. I've spent my whole life with horses, and one aspect about being with horses that I really love is training the horse. Training a horse has several challenges attached to it. One is there are no two alike. That I think everyone knows. But the other very important aspect of training as a horse is that they many times are not cut out to do the same discipline. You might have a chosen field in mind for a horse, and it turns out later that that is not the right field for that horse. So you have to remain alert during the time you do the basic foundation of educating the horse at the beginning. Carl Mikolka came from the Spanish riding school to spend his time in the United States training, and we gave him a barn at our stable in Pembroke, Massachusetts, to use as his dressage base. Carl did not have a bedside manner, and many times he would yell out things into the air, and we were expected to take them in. I remember one morning he arrived, and there were 20 20 horses working in the ring at the same time. And he yelled out into the open air, "Every horse deserves a life." Well, there was silence in the indoor arena for about 50 seconds while we assimilated that knowledge. I had no idea what he meant by that, but I just knew we were supposed to take this in. Whether it affected me or not, I was going to remember it. I had at that time a horse named Oliver. Oliver was a school horse. Oliver was really good at the walk and the trot, but cantering was just beyond him. If you forced him to canter, he would be extremely nervous, and the canter was not good at all. Cantering was out of the league of Oliver. He was a walk trot horse. So I taught people to post on Oliver. He was good at that, and I used him only at the walk and at the trot. He also had a problem with things on the ground, rails on the ground, or puddles, or anything, a shadow, anything on the ground could cause him to dissolve into a fit of nervousness. I realize now he was probably vision impaired, but at that point I didn't realize that. I just didn't face him with anything he didn't like. One day I finished my lesson with Oliver, and Carl finished his lesson with a dressage rider at the same time. And he walked over to me and he said again, "Every horse deserves a life." And I said, "Yes, I have heard that, Carl, and I understand it." He said, "I will take Oliver." I said, "Really? What will you do with him? You're taking him away?" "I will take him to the dressage barn," he said. The little girl who was riding Oliver got off. She was a little nervous about Carl. Carl took the horse and walked away with it to the dressage barn. I didn't see Oliver for about 2 weeks. I was pretty busy. Carl was not there while I was there. It was not until about 3 weeks later that I saw Oliver come out of the barn again with Carl, who was working him in hand along the wall of the indoor arena. Oliver had on 4 white bandages, and he had a square dressage pad. He had on one of the expensive dressage bridles, and Carl was treating him as though he was a champion. He taught Oliver how to do the levade. The levade is something like a rear, but the horse crouches down very low to the ground with intense flexion of his hocks. And it is done, to Oliver's great relief, at the halt. Oliver did not need to move. He simply crouched in a rear like position and stayed there. And he loved it. And Carl fed him carrots for this. Once Carl had taught him how to do levade, he took every single student that I had between the age of 10 and 13. Every child in the stable was allowed to sit on Oliver while he did the levade. So these children, only very young children, were doing airs above the ground with no stirrups on levade, on Oliver. Oliver got his picture in the yearbook. Oliver was part of the yearly demonstration that we did to duplicate the Spanish riding school's Sunday performance. We did it with children. Oliver did the levade between the pillars that were erected at X. Oliver became famous. Everyone fed him carrots and visited Oliver. Oliver was at the peak of his career. Every horse deserves a life. That taught me a lesson because Carl, coming from the Spanish riding school, which is academia for sure, there was no agenda in training a horse at the Spanish riding school. There were no commissions to be made. There were no horses to be sold. There was no competition, no prizes to be won. There was no other incentive to training the horses than to reach the top personal potential of every horse that was trained. And that is pure training of horses. I always loved that. And I realized that when you begin to train a horse and you teach him the basic rudimentary foundation of training, you must, at the same time that you're doing that, be on the watch for the tendency of that horse towards a certain discipline. And when you find it, you must go in that direction. It has nothing to do with what you had planned for that horse. It has to do with the horse and where his tendencies lie. I have another story to tell you about. One of my favorite students of all time was a girl you might know named Jan O'Donnell. She was a very well-known and good amateur hunter rider. But throughout her time with me, from when she was 10 on a pony, and then on an equitation horse, and then on a junior hunter, and then an amateur hunter, she always was a good rider and a good student. One day, as an older teenager, she said to me, I would like to train my own horse. I would like to buy a young horse and train it. Fine, I said. We found a quarter horse, an adorable little quarter horse with a dish face and a big tail. And he was a bright chestnut and he had a very cute expression. And Jan set out to train the horse. Gradually, she taught him to do flying changes were easy. He did them automatically. He was very well balanced, and she taught him all the basics. There was a problem. He jumped. He jumped everything he was asked to jump, but he did not have a good style. And there was not much you could do about it. He just wasn't fancy as a hunter should be in front. And neither was he a big jumper prospect. He was a lovely little quarter horse with a poor style of jumping. Never mind, she said. I will teach him to do a dressage ride. We have Carl Mikolka in the barn, and with your help and Carl's help, I will train a dressage horse. She had never done that before. Little by little, with everyone's help and everyone acting, this horse became a fourth level dressage horse, and he did it beautifully, and he loved it. And Jan loved it, even though she was showing hunters at one end of the stick. She was training a fourth level dressage horse by herself because he wasn't a hunter. I was so proud of her, and that horse found a wonderful home as a dressage horse and went on to pleasing a lot of people. She recognized right away what a good horseman should recognize. The horse was not predestined to be a hunter. He was predestined to be a dressage horse. He was happy in his work. He loved it and he did it well. Part of the responsibility of someone who likes to train has got to be to recognize the tendency of a horse and try to make him his personal best in a discipline that he loves. Sometimes you buy a horse with the idea, because the made horses are so expensive now that you cannot afford to buy the 7 or 8 year old horse, which already has become a good dressage horse or a jumper or a hunter, because he's so expensive. So you say, all right, I can spend the money for a 3 year old and I will train that horse to be my next hunter. What if he doesn't lend himself to that discipline? You cannot just discard him and throw him out. You should follow him in his direction and broaden your own ability to train a horse and put the horse in the place where he belongs and where he can be happy for the rest of his life. Well, training a horse can produce a great joy for the trainer, but it is not what the trainer receives from the horse. It is what the horse receives from the trainer that produces this feeling of complete satisfaction at the end of the job. You can recognize a horse which is happy in his job. I can remember when it was time to take off for Rio for the Olympics, and Kevin Stote had already gone, and I gave his horse Rever one last little exercise on the lunge line. Rever bucked and played. He had really come to the top of his game. He loved what he was doing. He had learned to do a pirouette. He could do middle trot from the halt. And he learned all of this, and it brightened his spirit, and he could buck like a young horse. He went off to Rio and was part of the gold medal team. He did a wonderful job, and he supported his team. He was 17 years old. This was a horse at the top of his game due to the fact that the training was all centered around his personality. Everything was for that horse. If you train a horse that wins a gold medal, or the Kentucky Derby, or the champion of the Hunter in the Washington International Horse Show, you have reason to be proud. But if you train a horse that can't even canter, but he can do a levade, and 10 kids learn to ride the levade on that horse, you can feel the same pride and pleasure in having brought a horse to his own personal best. Now I look forward to your feedback, because this is the way I look at training of horses. From my lifetime, I've trained a lot of horses. I've trained them to do all sorts of things, but I don't care what I train them in, which discipline. I care that they get to their personal best. I'm looking forward to your feedback, and I hope that when you watch this on YouTube, you press all the buttons and you sign up and you do everything. But me personally, I want to know what you think of this approach. Thanks for listening. Bye.